Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with a midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, and then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. And so with that, we're going to start with this one from New Cannabis Ventures, highlighting that cannabis sales grew 5% sequentially to $1.68 billion in the month of March. And so looking at a per-day basis, April sales, as covered by cannabis data analytics firm BDSA, expanded sequentially in 10 out of 11 states, which is a positive thing to hear for us. As compared to a year ago, sales were down in 7 markets, mostly driven by declining concentrates growth. And in this review, they take a look at the markets one by one, beginning with the eastern markets and then concluding with the western markets. And in total, sales across the 11 markets totaled $1.68 billion, again, during the month of April. And so obviously that is a bigger month where we have 420, and we usually do see record sales set. But with that, just going to take you through the eastern markets and just mainly going to show you the snippets. You can pause to read for more detail. But mainly Florida cannabis sales in April. Sales rose 4.9% from March to $184 million, up 23.6% from a year ago. So obviously that trajectory is going in the right direction. And Florida is still a medical-only market as of now. So one that does open for adult use with the tourism and the large population there, that is going to be massive. And so we're holding out for that. While we look at Illinois cannabis sales, we previously published data released by the state showing that sales rose 0.4% from March and 8.9% from April 2021. And while I did recently in my last video share the figures for May, which were down slightly from April. Just good to see these bounce back after a slower January and February. And then down to Maryland, which is also a medical-only market, so no adult use yet. And so that's likely why we've seen this sort of trail off, because they need to open that up in order to keep the growth going. Sales fell 1.5% from March to $44.1 million, down 7.3% from a year ago. But the good news is that Maryland will have the question to legalize adult use on the ballot in November. And so it's very likely that we will see Maryland unlock for adult use most likely next year at some point. Just depends how quickly they get that off the ground. While if we look at Massachusetts cannabis sales, sales grew 3.3% from March and 13.9% compared to a year ago to $146.3 million. So good to see growth continuing in Massachusetts, another one of the bigger eastern states. So just you can pause to read for more info there. And then lastly, Michigan cannabis sales, as they'd previously written about data released by the state indicating that Michigan cannabis sales increased 27% compared to both March and a year ago. But this is also, I forget when Michigan did launch for adult use. I believe it might have been near the end of 2020. But nonetheless, good to see this massive jump, as obviously 420 contributed a lot to that, but that is significantly more in total medical and adult use than we'd seen previous months. And so with all the factors in Michigan, very competitive, unlimited licenses, so prices are going down. Just good to see, at least a significant jump up in April. And lastly, Pennsylvania, of the East Coast markets, and Pennsylvania is still a medical-only market as well. Sales fell 1.9% in April to $102.1 million, down 5.4% compared to a year ago. And so obviously, once they do allow adult use to start, that's going to help drive sales in the state by a significant amount. But until then, we do typically see with just medical only, over long periods of time, it does trail off as it's just slow to recruit new patients and normalize this wonderful medicine. But to the western markets, Arizona cannabis sales, combined sales of $112 million were up 0.6% from March and down 10.1% compared to April 2021, which was the first month when adult use sales were launched. And so good to see what happened with Arizona as it was a medical market, and then they launched for adult use. We can see a massive jump. But you can pause to read for a further breakdown of how things are going in Arizona. Well, if we look at California cannabis sales, good to see this bounce back as well, as we have not been able to reach the highs that we did see in 2021 when the stimulus checks came out. But April release included a restatement of the total size of the California market to better align with the state published data, as California sales increased 5.8% sequentially to $425.1 million total, but fell 12.3% compared to a year ago. And so that is how California is looking, still trying to do the best that they can with that difficult illicit market that they're battling and trying to compete against. Well, if we look at Colorado, the most mature market in the country, sales grew 3.4% in April compared to March, dropping 18.7% from a year ago to $166.1 million. But still very strong sales for, again, a state with just a population of 5 million people. And so obviously as the western markets are more mature, we see less growth heading up in the right direction, as with time that does happen in markets. And so that is why we are hopeful when new states come online, that will help drive the growth that we might be losing over time to some of these mature markets. And so as it's a work in progress and as we move through these uncharted waters, still very exciting though to see strong demand nonetheless. As Nevada cannabis sales, Nevada is definitely having the hardest time as sales decreased 5.8% compared to March, falling 35.8% from a year ago to 56.1 million. Obviously stimulus checks helped a lot with sales in Nevada plus tourism, but now that we should be past the pandemic and all, it'd be ideal to see this go back up. And I don't know enough about the Nevada market to really try and get into why they're struggling so much, but just hope that they can figure out ways to get that to bounce back in the future going forward. And so we've got Oregon as the last market as well. Sales in April grew 1.5% from March to 89.3 million, down 18.7% from a year ago. And so more information on Oregon right there. But so for the most part, it's just good to see that sales did bounce back in March and April compared to January and February, where obviously it's not ideal to see that slowdown. But with that, just happy to report that sales are heading in the right direction slowly but surely. And with that, cannabis sales continue to surge in New Mexico, one of the newest markets to launch, I think, as of April 1st. Reyes said, this is an industry that can produce $300 million annually, create 11,000 new jobs, and $50 million in state revenue in just the first year. It sounds like all of these are very positive and complimentary for the citizens of New Mexico as well. And so with that, this is the breakdown of the total sales in May, recreational and medical. And while I'm not going to play the video, just wanted to share a few snippets as the Cannabis Control Division recently released the statewide number of cannabis sales in our state. In April, our state pulled in 22 million in rec cannabis sales, and that's just over half the total of cannabis sales, which reached almost 40 million. And in the month of May, there was a slight decrease, but not by much, obviously because April was big with 420, and I think that's when they launched. But our state sold around 21 million in rec cannabis, and it accounted for almost 55% of total cannabis sales, which is definitely in line with what we see from other states, because obviously those that have been in the medical system for a while typically know what they like or know what they want, and therefore once cannabis is legal for adult use, they don't have to wait to go to their doctor. They can take initiative and go to the dispensary. But nonetheless, good to see those in New Mexico benefiting from ending cannabis prohibition already. As Victor Reyes, I think, is the deputy superintendent of the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department, saying we're seeing a constant commitment to this industry, to this product. We see New Mexican supporting New Mexico businesses. Nonetheless, it's just good to keep it in New Mexico, because obviously this will help the state flourish. This will help those within the state flourish. Just another prime example, the benefits of ending cannabis prohibition. And so with that, on to Montana, from this article from Cannabis Business Times highlighting that Montana 2022 cannabis sales eclipse 123 million so far. And so one of the nation's youngest adult use cannabis retail markets, Montana, banked 16.6 million in adult use sales and 8.3 million in medical sales in May, according to the state's Department of Revenue. Combined adult use and medical sales dipped slightly from 25.4 million in April to 24.9 million in May, which in part was a factor of medical sales decreasing at a greater rate, 8.9%, than adult use sales increased 1.9% for the month. While other factors may include the absence of the 420 sales boost in May, that's probably the biggest factor, and the fact that April had 5 Fridays and 5 Saturdays while May had 4 each. And so since Montana has become the 12th state to launch commercial adult use cannabis sales on January 1st of this year, retailers have recorded 76.5 million in adult use sales and 46.7 million in medical sales, far more than 123 million combined. And so much like other maturing markets, adult use sales have continued to grab a larger market share during that time, representing about 58% of the overall sales in January and nearly 67% of the overall sales. And so you can pause to read more of just a breakdown comparing to how other markets have fared over time, but nonetheless, great job, Montana. Keep doing what you're doing and providing a safer, non-addictive alternative to your citizens. And so with that, just wanted to try to provide an update because I'm still not exactly sure whether this bill has passed or not. So we're just going to reference this article that I shared in my last video. New York Senate passes bill to crack down on illicit cannabis possession and sales. Fair enough. If you pass this, this would be great news. And so there were talks of it being passed, but just wanted to share this extra context. As June 2nd is apparently the final day of New York's 2022 legislative session. So if the state assembly doesn't pass the bill by midnight, it will be dead until at least the start of the 2023 legislative session in January, unless a special legislative session is called before that flag sets. While apparently under the rules proposed in the bill, illicit cannabis is defined as taxable weed products for which no taxes were paid. Shouldn't it be any cannabis that's grown in a facility without a license? So it's like, just, you know who the illegal growers are. Target them. Don't try to target any companies like small business owners and minority entrepreneurs that are behind on paying their taxes. So Kruger's spokesperson said it basically means any cannabis that wasn't grown or purchased from a licensed operator in New York. Yeah, that's not what I get when I read that. And I'm sure that's not what many people get when they read that. And then just to scroll down to add it, with Joshua Waterman, a cannabis cultivator who co-founded the Legacy Growers Association, said that even though legislators and regulators' intent behind the bill may be good, he can't support that. And I wouldn't support that crap either. Although the idea of shutting down dispensaries that are flooding the market with products from other states is something we would support, we just don't see that in this bill, Waterman said. And I'm afraid this will end up being another way that the state or for the state to fine and penalize lower class individuals, especially minorities. And so unfortunately, that's kind of what I get when I read their explanation of what this bill is going to target. And so with that, just wanted to jump over to this one from Leafly, titled "Light Up," says New York City Mayor Adams defying the state's desire to crack down on illegal cannabis. And so this is obviously not what you want to see, especially when there is a growing crime problem in New York, not only because they decriminalized cannabis, but have waited 15 months and then some to launch their adult use program, therefore allowing organized criminals to benefit from the selling of illegal cannabis. And clearly he doesn't want to crack down on that. But also at the same time, the district attorneys have just taken very lax stance to crime. They're not charging people for a lot of things that you would originally charge people for, even just a few years back. For whatever reason, I don't understand, but that is why there's a growing crime problem in New York, and you would think that the mayor would want to crack down on this, but for whatever reason, he just wants to try and be a cool uncle and become popular. And so I don't think that's going to have a good result in the long run, but regardless, on Friday, June 3rd, New York City Mayor Adams gave the green light to millions of New Yorkers to light up some weed and enjoy themselves. And he doesn't care if you're smoking or selling unlicensed cannabis for now. Doesn't that seem like a bit of a problem? Enjoy yourself, light up, and most importantly, spend some money, says the mayor during an appearance at the Cannabis World Congress and Business Expo at Yavita Center in Manhattan, encouraging New York citizens to buy illicit product and help the black market thrive because they can't be bothered to launch the adult use program sooner than later. And this coming from the New York City mayor. You cannot make this shit up. And so with that, the day before the mayor said light up, New York Senate, led by Senator Liz Kruger, passed a bill that would crack down on illicit possessions and sales. And so this is off what we saw in the last article. That bill needed approval from the state's assembly before the end of last week to move forward. But Friday passed without a vote as Mayor Adams' words rang loud and clear, and the Senate-backed bill is now on ice until 2023. And so I don't necessarily know what this means. I Googled what does it mean when a bill is on ice in politics. Couldn't find an answer, so do let me know in the comments. But how misleading. It says that this passed. Doesn't seem like this actually passed if, the bill is now on ice until 2023. And so with that, just wanted to share that while we think there was progress and actual, a bill passed to crack down on illicit crime, that might not actually be the case despite it being reported over and over again. But it seems like in this day and age, if you report it over and over again, enough dumb people are going to believe it. Mayor Adams told the Javits Center crowd that he doesn't want to approach the state's budding cash crop, the illegal cash crop right now. New York expects to collect $1.25 billion from legal weed in the next 6 years with heavy hands. He says he intends to give warnings and wrist slaps to those bending the rules, basically criminals right now that are selling illegal cannabis, instead of holding them accountable. So it's just unbelievable how we've gotten to this point. This is all from the progressive policies and the cult of wokeism that has seeped into a lot of our big institutions that focus on things that make people feel better as opposed to what's actually true and works based in reality. And so with that, on to some good news from Todd Harrison, sharing that U.S. mayors approve resolution demanding Congress fix cannabis banking issues and end prohibition. So we do love to see at least U.S. mayors are stepping up, even if Mayor Adams happens to be one of those many. But the organization represents the 1,400 U.S. cities with populations of 30,000 or more. So just good to see more support and more calls demanding for Congress to pass safe banking. And with that, just wanted to share this from the U.S. Cannabis Council. As big safe banking endorsement, the U.S. Conference of Mayors passed the resolution today calling on Congress to pass the Safe Banking Act, and the group also endorsed comprehensive cannabis reform. And the full text is there if you'd be interested, so you can grab the link if you wanted to check it out. But just to add what they put in here, 2000 and 2022, highlighting their 2022 proposed resolutions with 11 points helping state their case as to why SAFE is good policy, why all the cities that these mayors represent would benefit, and why Congress needs to act and stop delaying and pass SAFE now. And with that, wanted to share this from Tom Engel. As the Pennsylvania House Finance Committee approved an amendment to decouple state tax policy from the federal 280E provision. We love to see that, thereby allowing medical cannabis companies to deduct business expenses in their state filings. And while we've seen some progress out of New York and Pennsylvania with this, just happy to highlight that the Finance Committee has approved this, and so it likely has to go back to the Senate before maybe going back to the House and then maybe becoming law eventually. But I will update you as, again, the longer that the feds take and the longer Congress delays, just good to see states taking initiative like this. And with that, also from Todd Harrison, as North Carolina medical cannabis bill goes to House with final Senate okay. As I just mentioned, I do believe from the Senate it goes to the House before being approved and then sent to the governor to be signed into law. And so I will keep you updated, but progress out of one of the more red southern states we wouldn't expect, as the first opportunity lawmakers have to legalize medical cannabis in North Carolina goes to the House of Representatives. So best of luck, North Carolina. Please try not to screw this one up. Well, I just wanted to share this one from stlouistoday.com. As Canna Cocktails and Gummies, Missouri's cannabis industry preps for legalization. And so Missouri is another state that is working to get cannabis on the ballot. And so I'm not going to go through this whole story. I just wanted to share it as it's another state working towards ending cannabis prohibition, and it's building momentum much like we're seeing from other states. But as Missourians won't vote on fully legalizing cannabis until later this year, but it will likely be on the ballot. So obviously that's something for us to look forward to with Maryland and other states states that from now until then do get on there, but the industry is confident. So happy to share this. And the 390,000 signatures has convinced them that they will get what they need in order to put it on the ballot. And so with that, just wanted to share this update, as Missouri is another one of those hot medical markets that clearly wants adult use sooner than later because they see the benefits of that. So just wanted to share that one. While we can take a look inside a cannabis grow facility in Ohio.
The Amazon in the field.
And a bit of context just to highlight that Ohio is one state that I don't think I've shared a whole lot of stories about compared to some other states, just because maybe the stories haven't crossed my path or the data is not as accessible. But that does not mean that things are not slowly chugging along and evolving on the ground in a lot of these states. And Ohio does have a successful medical cannabis program that is slowly but surely heading in the right direction. And while they have not legalized for adult use yet, just wanted to share this to provide some context about the progress in Ohio as well.
A jungle fit for the Amazon in the fields of Yellow Springs, Ohio. Cannabis plants growing tall, all types, strands, and variants, to supply more than 250,000 Ohioans following doctor's orders.
As I was graduating, the medical program in Ohio was getting started, and I just really wanted to dive in and see what I could do to help provide medicine for patients in Ohio.
Cresco Labs has one of 37 medical marijuana control program cultivation licenses in Ohio. They can grow up to 25,000 square feet just as a starting point.
Little tiny sugary looking things right there are trichomes.
Rachel Fay, the director of cultivation at this facility, says from start to finish, they believe in near surgical cleanliness, even suiting me up to protect the process.
Everything inside of this room is a future mother plant.
Yeah, it's called
I think
standards.
A lot of people have preconceived notions about it, but then they come into a place like this and it looks a lot like a farm, or, you know, like you said, we look very medical right now. It's you know, it's very pharmaceutical what we're doing here. So.
Like Pharma would hate to hear that.
Carefully grown.
This is our vegetative space. This is where we house our mother plants. The mother plants are the start of all of the genetics in our facility.
Carefully transferred. Each plant is given a precise amount of light for months, clipped at full bloom, sent to labs to extract the THC oils, and eventually into the kitchens.
It's not something that you're just getting off the street. It's something that's produced in a kitchen. There's formulation to it, and then it goes out for testing so you know exactly what is in it.
Michael Mount moved from the dairy industry into cannabis. Now he oversees the kitchen, from the mixing to pouring, all the way to packaging.
For regulation purposes, this is very important. Also, it indicates to the patients that this is an infused piece of candy.
While cultivation labs across Ohio are growing the green, these businesses and the state are making it. In the first 6 months of the medical marijuana program in 2019, sales topped $14.5 million. In the last 6 months alone, that number has exploded to nearly $228 million. That's nearly 16 times more. And the 3-year total, $837 million. And the innovations keep on coming.
We've heard our customers. We know they want chocolates. We know they want sweet tart tablets. And we know that they want different gummies that will hit on different formulation specifications that they're looking for.
Cresco Labs VP of Product Development, Stephanie Gorecki, a scientist herself, says there's a high level of care to not only make these taste good, but also to have the desired effect to ease whatever is ailing medicinal users.
This is a very highly scientific field, all the way from cultivation to extraction to edibles formulation.
What was once considered reefer madness is now a possible sea of hope.
I think the message is just that cannabis is really helping a lot of people in the state right now, and it's a really exciting thing to be a part of.
Let's look at more of these numbers. Ohio has nearly 261,000 people with medical marijuana prescriptions. Now, out of those, nearly 17,000 are veterans, and more than 1,000 people with access to medical marijuana have actually received a terminal diagnosis.
How many doctors do you think are allowed to actually diagnose cannabis in Ohio? This is where it's tough, because you just need to get more doctors to get on board, and that will help this growth flourish a lot more than it is.
And as far as who can write those prescriptions, 240 physicians in Ohio currently are allowed to recommend medical marijuana. 36 of those are in our area.
36 in their area, 240 in total. And so once we can get that number up, get doctors out of big pharma's pockets and understanding the science behind cannabis, that will help a lot of these states, especially with the medical focus, flourish, I think, in the long run. So while mainstream media outlets will not cover any of the positive progress in the cannabis industry, I do love to see these local news stories that do help us see what's happening on the ground. And with that, Jungle Java sharing Columbia Care operationalizes their second cultivation facility in New Jersey and expands adult use hours at both Garden State Cannabis locations. And so good news that Columbia Care has gotten their second cultivation center up and running. Obviously, that's very beneficial for them because then they can supply their stores and the heavy demand for adult use in New Jersey. And so obviously with that, the last story did look at Cresco Labs. This one is about Columbia Care. And so if all things can go well for these two companies in the future and have their merger come together, I think it's going to be one hell of a behemoth. And so with that, wanted to share a few more stories. Thank you, Todd, for sharing this one. As Mississippi sees a surge in medical cannabis registrations as application portal launches, it looks like we'll see products by the end of this year. And so with that, just a bit of an update out of Mississippi. Happy to see that many people in Mississippi are applying to get medical cannabis cards. And so with that, it's encouraging the state to try and get their program up sooner than later, because obviously if there's demand for it, you'd rather supply it legally than have the black market do that, right? So with that, though, not all great news. And again, this is speculation from Pablo at Cantor, and Pablo has a tendency of being wrong in a lot of what he writes up. But just wanted to share this one as Todd shares it. Pablo at Cantor on U.S. cannabis, but mainly the Massachusetts market. And so I read through this, and I mean, it's still, I think, early to jump to conclusions, but he titles this one, What Happened to the Massachusetts Market, and mainly just highlights a few things here. That said, we think investors should study what has happened in the Massachusetts market as they navigate the MSO space. Given depressed sectoral valuations, we realize this may be less relevant at this point in time than, say, passage of SAFE. But the MA case does color our judgment on how to choose MSOs in which to invest. And sales in MA, recreational medical market, have slowed. Prices are down year over year, wholesale 40%, retail 20%. The accelerated pace of stores opening has resulted in revenue store attrition, halved over the past 2 years. And based on the improved license pipeline, we expect economics to further worsen. And so that is his very critical take. But if we do take a look at, Massachusetts, seems like things are heading up in the right direction. And obviously there are many factors, but just to counter what Pablo was saying here, and he seems pretty, adamant on Massachusetts going in the wrong direction. Again, I just wanted to share this so that you can read it if you're interested in reading it. Not to say that the Massachusetts market is going to be doomed anytime soon, just simply sharing what Pablo has to say. And so with that, you can pause to read if you wanted to hear his take on Massachusetts, and then let me know in the comments what you think, whether Massachusetts has more room to grow or whether, they're going to continue to see some struggles. But again, I think it's also a bit of a testament to the states on the East Coast that are a lot more progressive, imposing pretty strict regulations from the get-go compared to Western markets, and now we might be seeing some of the consequences of that. And so it's not necessarily more regulation that's going to help it. Might actually even just be less and more competition. So lastly, wanted to share a few other stories though, as MJ Biz Daily does highlight that California plans to target cannabis businesses over unpaid taxes. And while it was nice to see Governor Newsom finally do something that he can virtue signal about when he announced that he would eliminate the cultivation tax for all operators in California as of July 1st, 2022, which no doubt helps the bigger operators who've been able to survive this long, as opposed to the small ones who've likely had to consolidate or go out of business already. Just seems like they're trying to attack the industry in other ways. And so this is just my interpretation of it. Let me know in the comments what you think, but just doesn't seem right, as California's business tax collector is ramping up enforcement against unlicensed and licensed cannabis companies, which owe the state nearly $200 million in unpaid taxes. $200 million is a drop in the bucket to what this industry does. They do over $200 million in revenue sales every single month, but regardless, wouldn't you want to just focus on the unlicensed ones? Because how would you even get tax from an unlicensed grower? You think they're going to pay tax if they're not even going through the effort to get a license? And then on top of that, they're going to use resources to also go after licensed cannabis companies, as opposed to trying to focus 100% of resources on the unlicensed ones and try and help any of the licensed growers and people that went through the right steps to actually do this all legally prosper. It just doesn't make sense to me. And so in the past few months, the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration has taken a new tack against underground businesses that have undermined the legal market by skipping taxes and undercutting licensed companies. This would just be illegal operations. Wouldn't you just want to take down all the illegal operations that you can? In particular, the CDTFA has launched raids and auctioned off seized properties as part of heightened efforts to collect unpaid taxes and rein in underground operators. And so with that, I get that. Yeah, you want to focus on the illicit market and those that never even applied for a license, those that are operating illegally and are not paying taxes. But then legal businesses, meanwhile, are facing stepped up efforts by the state as well. And fair enough, if that's how they want to do it, I'm not in charge, but it just seems like a lot better use of your resources to focus 100% on the illicit market to eliminate that, so that the legal market can actually, provide jobs, provide opportunity to the citizens of California legally, versus seeing organized crime thrive and just letting that continue to spiral out of control. So with that, another unfortunate one from Tom Angle, but have to share it, as breaking. The Delaware House of Representatives just voted to uphold Governor Carney's veto of a cannabis legalization bill, which is very unfortunate after sharing last week that while the governor did intend to veto this bill, apparently the lawmakers did have enough votes to override the governor's veto if he chose to do so. And while we thought that we might see democracy in action, Many of the lawmakers in numbers overriding the stubbornness of one governor. Unfortunately, it seems as if while Biden is the president, he does not want to see cannabis legalized in the state of Delaware that he represents. And so while that's still speculation, you just have to wonder, what could it have been that made the lawmakers who had the votes to override the veto suddenly change their mind? And so with that, just another example from Puff Daddy highlighting Bill Maher fears Republicans are going to steal the issue of cannabis from the Democrats. And they haven't already, they're just dumb and not paying attention. They should have done that a long time ago. And while we could have said this last year and it would have been sort of like, wow, could that possibly happen? Now it seems just like a no-brainer. And the Republicans ought to steal this issue. And while there's a lot of time from now until November for the Dems to do something, and while they haven't done anything, and I wouldn't be surprised if they don't, I hope to be pleasantly surprised. But with that, I am still confident that even though McConnell does seem to still be against SAFE, there's probably enough push to get him okay with SAFE. There would be nothing else, unfortunately, under the Republican control, most likely, unless Nancy Mace can pull some strings with some big funders behind the scenes. That would likely take some time, but I still think SAFE could make it through under the Republicans, even if McConnell is very adamant against that, because, as I said, the lobbying money is just starting to build up in the end. And again, SAFE is a bipartisan issue. It's not necessarily just Democrat. Republicans see the value of it because it does save lives, it gets cash off the street, and it makes more money for a lot of industries that are involved in all of this. And so with that, a few others. Todd Harrison, thank you for sharing this one. Just another study if you'd be interested in checking it out. But Alzheimer's is the degradation of the mind, and cannabis stimulates brain cell activity. Let's study that, as apparently a study demonstrated the efficacy and safety of oil-diluted cannabis extracts in patients with Alzheimer's disease. And so just wanted to show another study as I try and relay as many of them as I come across them, as the data continues to add up that cannabis is a medicine, and more and more reason just to highlight why we ought to deschedule it sooner than later and give the plant back to the people and out of the controlling hands of the government. So last few stories, wanted to share this stupid opinion piece from the Wall Street Journal, but I'm also just happy to relay that I don't think anyone believes this anymore. And so I think they're just getting really desperate, as this one titled Cannabis and the Violent Crime Surge. Are you sure that's not because district attorneys are telling cops not to arrest people for anything? Or, that the fact that alcohol is responsible for 40% of crime already? Like, they're not looking at the data. They're just trying to sway people and change their minds with emotional writing. Heavy cannabis use among youth is leading to more addiction and antisocial behavior. The data does not back this up. And so whoever wrote this, fuck you. But with that, thanks you, Todd, for sharing some common sense. As if cannabis leads to violent crime surges, why have I never seen a fight at 80 Grateful Dead shows? In the immortal words of Snoop Dogg, I lost a lot of friends with alcohol, but made a lot of friends with weed. And that rings true. I can attest to that with my own life experience as well. And so with that, in this giant game that is perception versus reality that the media plays, while it's been a very long fight, I do think we're going to get there and that we are going to win because the plant is so good that it speaks for itself. And so with that, wanted to share this snippet just to highlight the mayor's urgency for passing SAFE. Now be it resolved that the U.S. Conference of Mayors urges Congress to pass the Safe Banking Act of 2021 to provide financial security for cannabis dispensaries and related companies to enhance public safety. With that, I wanted to share the most up-to-date update that we've got. And while this might not hold very well to what I was just saying, that we could see McConnell switch and allow SAFE eventually, again, it's easy for McConnell to be against it when he's not the Senate Majority Leader and doesn't have the pressure of lobbyists against him. And so just wanted to share this, though, because, again, things can change from now until when Republicans might take over in the midterms. Regardless, FYI, Hedgeye, Washington this AM, SAFE is still in negotiations. McConnell is against, but Schumer would not stand in the way if it would kill current legislation under consideration. So he's not going to stand in the way of SAFE passing if it's going to kill the America Competes Act and unravel the entire progress that they've made altogether. That's what I get out of this. Let me know in the comments if you get something different. But negotiations could drag on until mid-July, which is very different from what we had heard when they want to try and get it done by June 1st. And so that is what we know as of right now. This is the last legislation before midterm. So it seems like Schumer has every reason not to want to dismantle this legislation and all the progress that they've made, and it seems as if he's saying he'd not stand in the way if him standing in the way is going to potentially do that. And so that is it for today's episode, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address that. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.